"Watch it, you old black man," one of the teens sneered, deliberately shoving James Carter, a 90-year-old black veteran, so hard that he staggered off the curb, nearly plunging into the busy street. Car horns blared in the chaos. James, who'd earned medals in 3 brutal wars, caught himself, his heart hammering, not from fright, but from the cold rage surging through him. The gang of teenagers just laughed, slapping each other on the back with cruel glee before strutting away. 20 minutes later, still basking in their sadistic prank in a nearby alley, their path was suddenly blocked by 2 U.S. Marine uniforms and the crisp, measured footsteps of many more young Marines behind them. James Carter trudged slowly down familiar Maple Street. The autumn sun cast a golden glow over the scattered maple leaves, creating a scene both serene and picture-perfect. Each of his steps was deliberate, his worn wooden cane tapping the pavement in a steady, rhythmic click. There was a distant melancholy in James's gaze. Those eyes had witnessed too much loss and suffering across 3 major American wars: World War II, the Korean War, and the hellish battlefields of Vietnam. He'd faced death, been wounded, and watched comrades fall beside him. Yet the deepest scars weren't from bullets or shrapnel, they were from the prejudice he'd endured all his life. For James, his daily walk to the little bakery on the corner wasn't just routine. It was a simple pleasure in his twilight years. A small apple pie, a hot cup of coffee, those few comforts soothed him after decades of sacrifice and endurance. But today's peaceful afternoon was about to be shattered. Just a few steps from the bakery, James spotted a group of 5 white teenagers loitering by the entrance. Their loud laughter and brazen attitudes were all too familiar to the neighbors. Tall, strapping, and dressed in shabby streetwear, they exuded defiance and contempt in every glance and grin. James hesitated. He wasn't afraid, but he knew all too well the hostile looks and jeering slurs these kids reserved for him. Normally, he'd step onto the opposite sidewalk to avoid confrontation. Yet today, his aching joints made detours painful, and he silently asked himself why he should keep yielding to such senseless cruelty. Mustering his courage, James cleared his throat in a respectful, measured tone. "Excuse me, young man. May I pass, please?" Tyler Evans, the tallest of the group, wearing his baseball cap backward, turned to James with blatant scorn. His cold blue eyes roamed over the old veteran from head to toe before he spat out, "Old man, you can't see the other side, or are you too senile to know where you're going?" The others burst into mocking laughter, their jeers echoing with derision. A sharp pang shot through James's chest. He'd fought for freedom and equality, shed blood to protect people like these. And now here he was, standing in their way, humiliated by the very youth he'd once defended. Still, James kept his composure. "I only want to get into the bakery. It'll take a few seconds, won't bother you." Tyler stepped forward, his disdain growing more pronounced, his voice hushed but menacing. "Listen, old black man, this isn't your place. Best you move along. Or else." He let the threat hang in the air. The atmosphere grew suffocatingly tense. Passers-by glanced over, but no one dared intervene. James felt his heart tighten. He'd heard this hateful rhetoric too many times, and each instance cut deeper than the last. Yet he refused to back down now. He straightened his back a bit more, his voice calm yet firm. "I just want to go into the bakery. A few seconds? That's all." Tyler sneered, a cruel smile crossing his lips. Without warning, he lunged, ramming his shoulder into James. The old man lost his footing, his cane skittering across the pavement as he pitched forward into the onrushing traffic. Car horns shrieked in panic. Through the chaos, James caught sight of Tyler's satisfied, malicious grin, mirrored by his friends who laughed triumphantly behind him. In that moment, all James felt was searing indignation, a wound deeper than any battlefield injury, the sting of contempt and racial hatred. His peaceful afternoon had been shattered in the most brutal way. "Watch it, you old black man!" Tyler Evans sneered, his voice dripping with contempt as he leaned back, arms folded, eyes cold as they bored into James. Even after nearly being crushed by traffic, saved only by the instincts of a seasoned soldier, James Carter's patience and civility felt stretched to their breaking point. Tyler, the ringleader, stood there, all swagger, surveying James from head to toe, as if etching his frailty into his mind. His steely gray-blue gaze held both challenge and the unspoken hatred society had fed into these arrogant kids. "Wow, you're tougher than I thought, old man," Tyler taunted, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Veteran, huh? Should have folded up shop 40 years ago." His friends, bunched up like a wall behind him, erupted in laughter. Billy, the redhead, whistled mockingly. "What's next? Going to show us some battlefield roll and dodge moves right here on the sidewalk?" Brandon, Tyler's loyal sidekick, shouted over the noise so the whole block could hear. "Careful there, old man. The combat zone here is this gutter, not some desert or jungle." Hostility and scorn thickened the air. Under their jeers, James felt the emptiness in Tyler's stare, an emptiness born of contempt, of trampling another's dignity just to prove false superiority. Slowly, James bent and retrieved his cane, gripping it not as a weapon, but for reassurance. Memories of his service flashed back, the shared rations, the nightly shelter beside brothers in arms of every color, the frozen nights in foxholes. Yet here on his own homeland streets, he was nothing but old black man to these kids, their derision as painful as any battlefield wound. "I'm just asking for a bit of space to get into the bakery," James said, his voice low but clear. "I don't want trouble or to teach anyone a lesson. I just believe everyone deserves respect, young or old." Tyler snorted and beckoned his gang with a dismissive flick. "Respect? You want respect from us? You think your veteran's card or those rusty medals make you better than anybody?" He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a cold whisper meant only for James. "Let me tell you something, old black man. You ain't nothing here. The older you get, the more worthless you become. We, younger, white, are the future. Got it?" His words cut deep, reopening wounds James thought had healed long ago, wounds from even his fellow soldiers who once doubted him because of his skin. He'd known that gaze and tone before, but never felt it sting so sharply as hearing it from these kids in a society that claimed to have moved forward. The tension was suffocating. Storefront windows snapped shut. Passers-by glanced over, then hurried off, leaving James alone, facing naked hostility. In his eyes there was no fear, only sorrow, disappointment, and a quiet rage held back all his life. Tyler squinted, his lips curling into a cruel grin. "So, you want us to move? Go on. Crawl through if you've got the guts." Tyler and his friends formed a blockade, legs propped on benches, shutting off the bakery door as if declaring war on the last shred of dignity James possessed. James straightened his shoulders and met Tyler's gaze. Inside him, the blood of a soldier who once stood under fire to defend justice and freedom began to boil. Never before had an ordinary afternoon on this quiet street felt so charged with threat and animosity. The tense silence between James and the teens stretched on for several more seconds. Every glance and gesture was like a spark ready to ignite a wildfire. Tyler, still smirking defiantly, not only refused to make way, but deliberately escalated the threat. He stepped back as if directing the petty violence he'd scripted for himself. "All right, you want to test yourself?" Tyler yelled, making sure everyone around could hear, then shot a quick look at his friends for encouragement. Their mocking laughter and prodding nudges only fed his arrogance. James fought to remain calm, gripping his wooden cane as he prepared to step past their barricade of legs. He knew one wrong move could cost him dearly: his health, his honor. But to back down would be to accept their trampling of his dignity, something he refused at any age. Tyler glanced down at his feet. Then his eyes glittered with mischief. He waited until James lifted his foot to step forward, then suddenly swung his leg out to block him. At the same moment, what looked like a light tap on the shoulder turned into a deliberate shove, far stronger than you'd expect from a seemingly harmless 20-year-old. "Careful, old man," Tyler sneered. No concern in his voice, only malicious delight. James was knocked off balance. His frail legs wobbled on the narrow sidewalk. His cane slipped from his hand, and he staggered backward, his shoulder slamming into a cold metal bench. Right then, a gray sedan roared past the curb, its brakes shrieking in panic. It all happened in the blink of an eye. Chaos exploded around him, blaring horns, terrified screams from bystanders, the cacophony stretching endlessly in James's head. For a moment, he felt suspended between life and death. Every soldier's reflex surged back. He gritted his teeth and twisted, using the last of his strength to avoid the oncoming wheel, then rolled toward the edge of the curb. Behind him, Tyler and his friends still cackled, not carefree children's laughter, but the sound of cold indifference and unpunished cruelty. Tyler clapped his hands and addressed the group. "See that? He's got more moves than I thought. Guess the old man still thinks he's on the battlefield." Billy, Brandon, and the other teens joined in, laughing even louder, paying no mind to the danger that just passed or the angry glares from nearby neighbors. Onlookers remained silent. Some wanted to help, but were stopped by fear or hesitation. Meanwhile, Tyler and his gang strutted about proudly, as if they'd achieved some heroic victory in their cruel game. They reveled in having taught that old black man a lesson, never realizing that their actions had dishonored themselves and their community. James, hands trembling, retrieved his cane from where it had landed. His legs still shook, but his eyes burned with both pain and a long-suppressed fury. He quietly brushed the dust off his clothes, said nothing, but in his mind vowed this time he would not let it end in silence. The quiet peace of this small street had been shattered by a malicious shove, one that not only harmed a vulnerable veteran's body, but also reopened the wounds of an entire generation who'd once stood bravely for justice, only to be mocked and trampled on their own soil. Before the dust even settled, James Carter gripped his cane so tightly his frail hands shook. And yet, the resolve of a veteran forged in fire wouldn't let him fall. His eyes, blurred with age but still sharp as ever, had stared down death too many times to yield now. In that split second, reflexes honed on battlefields kicked in. He twisted aside, dodging the tire by inches, and caught himself on the curb before the traffic could sweep him away. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from a deep rising fury. What had just happened wasn't an accident. It was an insult, a deliberate act of cruelty meant to humiliate a man who'd spent his life fighting for freedom and equality. Yet while James gasped for breath, fighting to steady himself, Tyler Evans and his friends stood there on the sidewalk, wholly unrepentant. The pale autumn light highlighted every cruel smirk and empty gaze. Tyler crossed his arms, a smug half-smile playing on his lips, his eyes glittering with triumph. "He's pretty spry, isn't he?" Tyler shouted so the whole block could hear. "Maybe when we're his age, we'll still be able to run like that." Billy, Brandon, and the rest erupted in cold, knife-like laughter. Not one of them flinched at the memory of nearly pushing an old man into oncoming traffic. To them, it was nothing more than mindless fun, a break from the boredom of a lazy afternoon. A young woman passing by stopped as if to help James, but Tyler's menacing glare sent her hurrying away, clutching the child at her side and throwing James a single helpless look of pity. James stood perfectly still, the cane shaking in his grasp, not just from the fall, but from the sting of shame. Memories flooded back of being shoved aside and sneered at for the color of his skin, even as he wore the uniform and the medals he'd earned. Tyler resumed his performance as if the whole scene were a comedy. "So, old man, enjoy being the center of attention? Want to give it another go?" he jeered. The gang howled with laughter again, blind to the despair and barely contained rage in James's eyes. The cruelty of youth, fueled by groupthink, had erased every moral boundary. For Tyler, this was a moment to flaunt power, to impress his friends with a false sense of superiority born of cowardice. The street fell silent, but for the kids' echoing laughter, James's ragged breathing, and a few scattered uneasy glances from onlookers. Maple Street, once peaceful and calm, lay shattered by a vicious shove, and now by the cruel indifference of those too young to grasp the value of human dignity. Deep inside, James felt something change. He knew that if he simply endured this in silence, such cruelty would grow unchecked, turned again on other vulnerable victims, other veterans of color, other innocent people. A fierce determination ignited in his eyes. His heart still thundered, but now it beat with resolve. He would not let this atrocity be forgotten. The cruel laughter of the teens hadn't even died down when a woman on the far side of the street, her brown hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, darted across. It was Linda Martin, a familiar face on Maple Street, always helping the elderly, always the first to speak up when she saw injustice. She hurried to James's side, her worried eyes sweeping over his lined, weary face. Still trembling from the shove, he leaned on his cane and slowly straightened, his shoulders quivering, his back a little more bent than usual. Gently, Linda laid a hand on his arm, her voice trembling with concern and anger both. "Mr. Carter, are you all right? Those kids were awful. Do you need me to call an ambulance?" James forced a weak smile, far more fragile than his usual calm. He shook his head, his voice carried on the dust of time. "Thank you, Linda. I'm just a bit stunned. I've been through worse than this more times than I can count." Linda drew another breath, her compassion softened, but her gaze hardening as she turned toward the departing teens. She opened her mouth to scold them, but Tyler had already backed off. raising his hands in a mocking shrug before he and his friends stomped away, still jeering without so much as a backward glance. Their shadows stretched across the sidewalk in distorted streaks, as if the cruelty, the coldness, and the indifference they carried had its own twisted shape, lingering here through the years. Gently, Linda guided James to sit on a nearby park bench, quietly waiting as he caught his breath. But she didn't yet know that the deepest wound he felt wasn't from the fall, nor from bruises on flesh long accustomed to injury. It was an invisible wound, the humiliation and profound blow to his dignity, the proud heart trampled without mercy. Staring into space, James felt himself drift far from Maple Street. Memories, old painful memories, flooded back, vivid, as though they had happened yesterday. He remembered the first time a white officer ordered him out of the whites-only mess hall on base. He recalled the loneliness of wearing a U.S. Marine Corps uniform, yet still being treated as an outsider in his own unit. In his youth, James had believed that if he fought bravely enough, if he sacrificed enough, people would respect him, would treat him as a true American. Life, however, was never that simple. Despite medals and battlefield honors, he'd returned home to suspicious glances and whispered slurs simply because of his skin. He'd seen a fellow black soldier doused with water and insulted at a victory celebration, been refused service at a restaurant, forced to wait in the rain like any second-class citizen, found hate mail slipped under his door warning that not everyone wanted a black Marine living there. Those memories, long buried, surged back to life at the memory of Tyler's smirk and cold laughter. Noticing James's distant expression, Linda squeezed his hand and whispered, "You don't deserve to be treated this way, Mr. Carter. No one does, especially someone who's given their life for this country." James nodded, grateful for her kindness. But deep inside, his heart rose a wave of helplessness that weighed down his aging spirit. He wondered what all his sacrifices, those cold nights in foxholes, those brushes with death, had really bought him. A quiet afternoon on a small street now felt like a luxury he could no longer afford, just because of the color of his skin. Far off, the teens had turned into a narrow alley, their laughter echoing behind them. But James barely heard it. His heart felt as cold as it had on the battlefields, except now his enemy wasn't a foreign soldier, but the hatred and indifference of his own country's next generation. He thought of his father, fired from a factory for demanding fair treatment for black workers, of his mother, who wept all night when he enlisted, proud yet terrified he'd never be accepted as an equal. Each generation had to brace itself to endure, hoping one day things would truly change. "Are you sure you don't need to go to the hospital?" Linda gently asked, pulling him back from his reverie. James shook his head once more. "The fall was a mere scratch compared to what I'd lived through," he said. He knew his body would heal, but the wound in his heart would smolder on until this society learned to see, to honor, and to protect the dignity of every person, regardless of the color of their skin. Linda took a tissue from her purse and dabbed at a scratch on his arm, her eyes full of compassion and helplessness. She wanted to offer stronger words of comfort, that society had come so far, that these kids were just bad apples in a good barrel. But today, she wasn't sure she believed that anymore, seeing so much apathy on Maple Street. James looked at her and managed a heartfelt smile. He appreciated Linda's kindness, but he also realized he could no longer remain silent or patient. If he stayed quiet today, who else tomorrow would suffer this insult? How many more? Veterans like him, children like his mother, neighbors like Linda, would bear these invisible wounds. A fierce light sparked in his eyes, reignited by memories of old. The days when he was the soldier who dared stand up to injustice, whether under enemy fire or beneath the prejudice of his own countrymen. Silently, a new resolve took root in him amid the pain and shame. He would not let this happen again. He would not allow a single generation to believe that insulting, shoving, or discriminating against a black veteran was normal or without consequence. Beside him, Linda sat in quiet support, unaware that in James Carter's mind a new fight had just begun. A fight to defend his dignity, the dignity of those who've suffered, and the promise of justice and change for all Americans. Next to the park bench, where Linda Martin still sat patiently, supporting his arm, James Carter stood in silence, staring at his scuffed shoes and frayed laces. The late autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pastries and the distant sound of children playing. But inside him there was only loneliness, restlessness, and an ache he couldn't name. Silence. Two words he'd known all his life. Silence in the face of scrutinizing stares at Southern bases. Silence outside whites-only barbershops. Silence when he was denied a post-war job because of the race box on his application. He understood that silence offered no protection, earned no respect. It only allowed injustice, violence, and prejudice to grow unchecked, choking out any hope for fairness. Linda's gentle gaze was laced with sorrow. She seemed to read the thoughts in James's mind, yet all she did was squeeze his shoulder to lend him strength. Her warm brown eyes promised encouragement without a single word. "Are you really all right?" Linda asked for the third time in less than 10 minutes. James nodded, offering a quiet, subdued smile. But he knew if he stayed silent today, tomorrow other old men, other mothers, other black boys would become the next targets for another Tyler Evans. Silence was no longer an option for someone who once wore the Marine Corps uniform. He rose to his feet, his steps steadier, though his legs still trembled. Linda looked at him, surprised. "Do you want to go home, or should I take you to the police?" she asked. James shook his head, his eyes reflecting the resolve of a seasoned warrior. "No," he said. "I can't let this go as if nothing happened." "Not this time, Linda. I won't be silent anymore." Linda gave him a soft smile, sensing the change in his voice. She knew this man, though aged, still carried the unbreakable spirit of a battle-hardened Marine. He wasn't standing up just for himself, but for all those who had spent their lives gritting their teeth, waiting for the respect they'd earned. James took a deep breath, gazing down the alley where Tyler Evans and his gang had disappeared. In that moment, he saw his fallen comrades, black Marines who'd laid down their lives for this flag. They did not fight to return home only to be trampled, insulted, and dismissed on American streets. That thought rekindled his fire. A Marine never backs down from injustice. An old sergeant's words in Okinawa echoed in his mind. Today, James would not back down. He retrieved his battered cell phone from his jacket pocket, his hands trembling slightly as he searched for the number of the local Marine Corps Center, the place he visited at every commemoration, where he was truly heard and honored as a living piece of Corps history. Linda watched, a mix of surprise and pride in her eyes. "Who are you calling, James?" she asked. He didn't answer at once, only offered a knowing smile before pressing send. The line connected quickly with Sergeant Thomas Miller, who had shaken his hand warmly at last month's memorial. "Hello, Sergeant Miller. This is James Carter. Yes, me. The old guy you called tough as nails the other day." Miller recognized his voice and instantly adopted a respectful tone. "Mr. Carter, are you okay? How can I help?" James drew a steadying breath and recounted everything, from the hateful slurs and the shove that nearly killed him to Tyler Evans's callous laughter and that of his friends. On the other end, Miller paused, then spoke firmly. "I'll take care of this here. We watch each other's backs. No one, especially a black veteran like you, should ever have to endure that in this country." James hung up, feeling his heartbeat calm, not the tight anger of before, but a warm determination, urging him to stand his ground. At the far end of the street, the afternoon sun was fading, but in James's eyes a spark burned through the haze of memory and injustice. This time, he chose not to be silent. This time, he would make sure the community understood that discrimination and cruelty would no longer go unchallenged. Tyler Evans and his crew had turned the corner, still laughing, but James saw through their bravado. Their arrogance was a thin veil over cowardice and selfishness. They needed a lesson, not just for him, but for their own future. Linda laid a gentle hand on his shoulder, as if to say, "I believe in you." And in her heart, she felt a renewed hope that when one person dares to speak up and act, injustice, no matter how deeply rooted, can one day be uprooted. James stepped away from the bench with steady resolve. A new battle had begun, not with rifles and bullets, but with unwavering courage, fierce determination, and an unyielding stand against injustice. As the last rays of the afternoon sun faded over the rooftops of Maple Street, James Carter stood motionless beneath the old catalpa tree, his hand still gripping his outdated cell phone. Linda Martin had just bid him goodbye, leaving his shoulder with a hopeful reminder. "Believe that justice still exists, James." He lingered for a few moments, feeling the early winter chills seep between his fingers, and a resolve deeper and stronger than he'd felt since leaving the Corps. What Tyler Evans and his gang had done was far more than a cruel joke or youthful recklessness. It was contempt incarnate. A knife twisted into the pride and honor of a man who once carried the burden of defending his country. It was yet another scar on an entire generation of people of color who'd been disregarded and demeaned despite their sacrifices. In the distance, James could still see the teens lingering at the corner of the alley, their jeers echoing with the clatter of bottles tossed into a dumpster and occasional profanity ringing in the crisp air. It reminded him of darker days. The young Marine dragged out of the mess hall as a mockery, ridiculed for daring to be proud of his skin and his uniform. Today was the same scenario on his own soil, but he'd made up his mind not to back down. He slowly punched in the number for the Marine Corps recruiting station on Main Street. The phone rang steadily, each ring bolstering his determination. A firm, decisive voice answered. "Sergeant Thomas Miller, Marine Corps Recruiting Station." "Sergeant Miller speaking." James cleared his throat and spoke as calmly as he could, though his pulse still fluttered. "Hello, Sergeant Miller. This is James Carter. I'm not sure if you remember me. I'm the Marine veteran you met at the September commemoration." Instantly, Miller's tone warmed and grew solemn. "Mr. Carter, of course, I remember you. The fellow who served on 3 major fronts and inspired so many recruits here. What can I do for you?" James paused to choose his words carefully, each one clipped and precise as if delivering a formal report. "A group of teenagers blocked my path, insulted me, and shoved me to the ground. Their slurs were clearly racially motivated. They mocked me for being black and for my military service. The worst was when their leader, Tyler Evans, hurled me into the street, nearly getting me run over. I'm not badly hurt, but being trampled like that, it felt as if my years of sacrifice meant nothing. Sergeant, I cannot stay silent about this." On the other end, Miller was silent for a heartbeat, his breathing echoing resolve. "Sir, where are you now? Are they still around?" "They're still in the alley behind Maple Bakery at the corner. I think they'll stick around. It's their turf." Miller's voice sharpened like a bugle call. "Thank you for letting me know, Mr. Carter. Harassing a veteran, especially a black Marine, is unforgivable. I'll be there with a few Marines in a few minutes. Stay put and don't engage them. You'll have the respect you deserve in the name of the Corps." He hung up, letting out a breath that steadied his racing heart. He knew that if he stayed silent, this would vanish like so many past slights he'd endured, never wanting to make a fuss. But this time, he'd spoken out. This time marked a new beginning, not just for him, but for the whole community. The teens, oblivious to the incoming support, were still lounging in the alley. Tyler Evans slouched on a stone bench, his foot propped up, twisting a soda can as if celebrating his victory, glowing with the unrepentant arrogance of pampered youth. Brandon and Billy, his sidekicks, laughed as they rehashed James's near-fatal stumble, mimicking his voice in cruel mockery. "Guess the old guy thought he was back on the battlefield," Billy quipped. "Thank God nobody filmed it. Otherwise, TikTok would have eaten it up." Their malice hung heavy in the dim glow of the street lamp, the teens like ghosts, unaware of the line they'd crossed from prank to crime, from excitement to cruelty. Meanwhile, James sat quietly on the park bench, his spine straight, his eyes fixed ahead. His shoulders trembled, not from fear, but from the knowledge that many others like him, black veterans, had spent their lives suffering in silence. Today, though, thanks to a single choice, everything had changed. Soon the measured cadence of Marine boots would echo down the sidewalk. The men who had sworn to uphold the Corps' honor were on their way, and this time, James Carter would not stand alone. The moment James Carter's call ended, Sergeant Thomas Miller stood silent in the small office of the Marine Corps recruiting station, his fists clenched tight. Behind him on the wall hung photos of veterans, white, black, Latinx, Asian, all once bound by the same oath to defend America's honor and freedom. Their eyes, frozen in silver frames, reminded Miller of his solemn duty, not just to the Corps, but to the justice every uniformed man and woman deserves. Without hesitation, Miller strode into the hallway. A single sharp command halted the young Marines in their tracks as they finished physical training in the yard. Heads snapped to attention, awaiting orders. "Marines," Miller said, "one of our veterans was attacked and insulted by a group of teenagers on Maple Street. This is more than bullying. It's an assault on a veteran's honor, a racist affront, and an attack on the spirit of our Corps. We will not tolerate it, now or ever." The atmosphere changed instantly. The once boisterous recruits went stone silent, their faces hardening with righteous anger. To them, James Carter wasn't just some old man. He was a living symbol of pride, a reminder of battlefield sacrifices, proof that strength can overcome prejudice to build the corps we serve today. Miller nodded to two junior sergeants, Harris and Rodriguez, signaling them to join. 6 privates, only 18, or in their early 20s, but forged in strict discipline, fell in beside him, checked their uniforms, their eyes fixed on their senior. Within a minute, a compact, resolute detachment stood ready, exuding stern authority. "Move out," Miller ordered. The formation marched smartly down Main Street toward the alley James had described. En route, Miller briefed them crisply on 3 key points: an attack on a veteran, unmistakable racial bigotry, and their role not merely to reprimand, but to set an example for the entire community, even those bystanders who'd silently watched. Meanwhile, in the alley behind the bakery, Tyler Evans and his friends remained blissfully unaware of what approached. They clustered around a battered dumpster, laughing as they rehashed James's near miss with passing cars. Billy, the group's braggart, pulled out his phone, flicked open TikTok, and taunted. "Hey, if he'd really gotten hit, would anyone tell the newspapers, or would it just be another viral meme?" Tyler swaggered, worry nowhere on his face. In his mind, they were untouchable here. This is our street, he believed, and that conviction fed his arrogance. Brandon nodded in agreement, glancing nervously over his shoulder to see if anyone had overheard them. Deep down, he felt uneasy, but fear of being branded a traitor kept him silent. Groupthink had stripped each of them of conscience and compassion. They all knew their deed was cruel, but none dared speak up first. Then came the precise echo of boots on pavement. Tyler looked up and saw a small formation approaching, not in haste, but with such quiet confidence that even the sunlight fading over olive-green uniforms seemed respectful. Marine Corps insignia gleamed in the orange dusk. Leading the squad was Sergeant Miller, broad-shouldered, stern-faced, projecting the unmistakable aura of a man who would brook no disrespect, least of all toward a fellow veteran. Beside him, Harris and Rodriguez strode forward, 6 young privates behind them, each purposeful step reaffirming that here, order and honor were non-negotiable. Tyler raised an eyebrow, his lips curling in defiance, though a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. He glanced at Billy and Brandon, noting their sudden stiffness. But pride wouldn't let him show fear. "What's this about? You military types coming to teach a bunch of kids a lesson?" Tyler called out, his voice cracking slightly. Miller said nothing at first. He simply faced the teens, his eyes cutting into each of them like a razor. He saw their bravado, their awkward guilt, and he knew his mission was more than rebuke. It was to protect an unwavering value. After a pregnant pause, Miller spoke in a deep, resonant tone. "No one here has the right to insult a veteran's honor, nor to mock age or skin color. You may think you are strong, but you know nothing of real strength. The strength of sacrifice, of honor, of respecting those who paved the way for you, P." The air itself seemed to still. Each word rang like a drum beat through the narrow alley, touching the dormant conscience of every teenager present. Tyler tried to laugh it off, but his hand trembled slightly. In that charged moment, 2 generations, reckless, selfish youth versus disciplined defenders of justice, stood locked in a silent showdown. And what awaited Tyler Evans and his friends wasn't just a lecture. It was a lesson in respect, the consequences of cruelty, and the power of a community that refuses to remain silent. The alley, once alive with taunts, jeers, and the raucous energy of Tyler Evans's crew suddenly grew thick with an unspoken unease. Each measured step of Marine boots on the gray cobblestones rang out clear and firm, a herald of an entirely new order closing in. It had been only 10 minutes since James Carter placed his call to Sergeant Miller. Now the Marines were here, efficient, disciplined, and utterly silent in their approach. They didn't need raised voices or displays of force. Their very bearing and the quiet authority in their posture told everyone. These were men forged in iron discipline, unconcerned by wickedness or disrespect. Tyler sat perched on an old railing, swinging his legs, oblivious until Billy hissed in panic, "Hey, look over there!" Brandon turned and instantly felt that chill of pressure emanating from the alley's far end. 6 young Marines, flanked by 2 sergeants, stood blocking every exit. Sergeant Miller anchored the center like a steel gate lowered to seal off escape routes. In an instant, Tyler's cocky grin vanished. His face shifted from mockery to confusion, then to outright fear. Moments ago, he had been the little king of Maple Street. Now that false throne collapsed like sandcastles in a rising tide. Billy, Brandon, Kevin, and Ryan froze too. Their laughter and swagger drained away as they realized this prank wasn't some harmless pastime. No one spoke. Fear and shame spoke in every tremor and dart of their eyes. Miller took no immediate step forward. Instead, he signaled to the 2 Marines at the alley's mouth to hold fast while he and the other sergeants walked in calmly, their gazes sweeping each face as though reading souls. In those steel-gray eyes lay more than military authority. There was disappointment and pity for these lost youths. The alley fell utterly silent, save for the teens' ragged breathing and pounding hearts. Tyler scowled at Brandon, searching for support, but found only bowed heads, clenched fists, and sweat on nervous brows. Billy tried to muster a joke, but his laughter came out strained and hollow. "Sir, is something wrong?" Billy stammered, his voice shaking as he forced a casual tone. Miller's reply was as cold as it was firm. "There is no sir or kid today. Only discipline, truth, and consequences for your actions." Those words cut through every pretense, shredded the illusion of their survival of the fittest mindset. The teens huddled closer, their pack instinct now stripped to raw fear, not of muscle, but of the unwavering resolve and dignity before them. Sergeant Rodriguez, stepping forward, his voice steel-plated, demanded, "Who shoved Mr. Carter into traffic?" Tyler swallowed hard, took a half-step back, opened his mouth to deny, then realized every accusing eye was locked on him. He knew there was no escape. Their secret needed no confession. He was the obvious culprit. We were just kidding," Tyler mumbled, his eyes cast downward. Sergeant Harris cut in, low but commanding. "A joke? Pushing down an elderly black veteran nearly to his death? Your idea of a joke? Do you even know what he's done for this country and for the freedoms you enjoy?" Miller's gaze never wavered from Tyler as he asked, in cutting precision, "Do you understand what honor means? Do you comprehend the value of respect and the cost of indifference?" Tyler's hands shook as a whirlwind of confusion, shame, anger, and finally, real fear roiled within him. He'd always relied on others looking away. Today, for the first time, he'd crossed a line he could not uncross.